The glass of water you left on the counter overnight might be the most hazardous item in your kitchen. Your brain has already determined that it feels suspect, not because it has turned harmful. In the meantime, for the majority of human history, people drank from muddy pools, rivers, springs, animal paths, and any hollow tree that a frog hadn't previously claimed. There are no filters, no chlorine, and no small warning label that says, may contain diarrhea that could end civilization. So how did prehistoric people manage to live without access to clean water? It's not that their immune systems were unbreakable, their stomachs were miraculous, or everyone subtly switched from water to beer. Although many of the ancient people died from illness, they were also adept at observing their surroundings. They were significantly more knowledgeable about plumbing than the majority of us are. They discovered where water flowed, settled, deteriorated, and which sources were risk-worthy. Selecting the least horrible alternative was the first step toward survival. Evolution had to find a more fundamental solution before people could create pipelines, wells, filters, or the courageous choice to drink something bubbling next to a dead mammoth. How to maintain a huge, active primate alive in hot, arid settings. Water is a necessary piece of equipment. It transports nutrients, controls body temperature, lubricates joints, aids in digestion, and prevents blood from turning into a physiologically uncomfortable syrup. In certain circumstances, the human body can go weeks without eating, but extreme dehydration becomes dangerous in a few days. That meant that before lunch, our ancestors didn't just roam around and hope a lake would come. Their motions were connected to the water. The body already contained a portion of the solution. People sweat exceptionally well. Our ancestors used persistence hunting and long-distance walking to stay active in the heat by perspiring. However, there was a high membership cost and ongoing water loss. A hunter would eventually need to get a drink because of the same adaptation that allowed him to continue moving in the midday sun. Excellent cooling was provided by evolution, but it also left us with the bill. Water was also obtained by early humans from food. Moisture can be found in fruits, roots, leaves, meat, blood, and animal organs. Food may provide a significant portion of daily hydration in certain settings, eliminating the need to squat next to every dubious puddle. However, dietary moisture did not magically replace drinking water. Rather, it was an addition. It helps to have a juicy tuber. It's not a municipal reservoir. Behavioral intelligence was the true prerequisite. Humans acquired social knowledge about the landscape. Older members of the group could recall which river bends turned sluggish, which springs survived the dry season, where rain gathered in rock depressions, and how far the next reliable supply was over the ridge. This information wasn't trivia. It was human memory-stored infrastructure. Additionally, groups have to base their way of life on that understanding. Insects, predators, floods, and animal waste might make convenience a bad neighborhood option. Therefore, camps were frequently positioned within easy access of water, though not always exactly on top of it. Individuals may go to a source, gather what they required, and then flee to a more secure location. Therefore, humans did something more basic before they cleansed water. They created a mental danger map. The original water technology was not a well, a pot, or a filter. It was being aware of where to go. Finding water was just part of the issue. The other half involved determining if the water would hydrate you or start a very intimate conflict with your digestive system. Bacteria, parasites, and microscopic pollution were unknown to ancient people. No one observed a pond and commented, "The pathogen count seems elevated," but they were able to identify trends. Furthermore, natural selection is very adept at rewarding organisms who recognize when particular decisions consistently result in negative outcomes. Water that was moving was frequently better than water that was standing still. A spring that springs from a rock might be more dependable than a shallow lake that is warmed by the sun and frequented by all the local thirsty animals. Muddy water wasn't always lethal, and clear water wasn't always harmless, but location, temperature, taste, smell, and look offered hints. Animal behavior most likely also played a role. Trails may direct people to seasonal pools or secret springs. A gazelle can drink from a location that would cause a week-long spiritual crisis in a human digestive system, despite the fact that tracking animals was not an ideal quality control method. Even yet, animals showed where water was present, particularly in arid areas. Another map was provided by vegetation. Groundwater or a nearby source may be indicated by clusters of moisture-loving plants, greener regions during dry seasons, insects, bird activity, and specific tree species. Additionally, people may dig where water had recently flowed and let moisture soak into a shallow hole in order to seek beneath dry stream banks. On the first try, you might get something like soup. However, The top layer can become more drinkable once the silt settles. Rain accumulated in tree hollows and rock caves. Leaves could be used to collect dew. In frigid climates, snow and ice may melt. Shellfish and other foods could be a major source of moisture for coastal cultures. In the meantime, populations in the desert discovered the sites of underground water-storing plants, fruits, and roots. Safety was not guaranteed by any of these techniques. They were strategies for increasing the odds, and memory helped to increase those odds. Someone stayed healthy after drinking from the shaded spring. Another person drank from a cadaver downstream and spent the next 2 days second-guessing every choice that had brought them there. Both encounters turned into knowledge. People are very good at transforming personal sorrow into collective wisdom. Long before anyone realized why practical rules were effective, they might be preserved by stories, cautions, customs, and taboos. After a lot of rain, avoid drinking there. Late in the dry season, avoid setting up tent next to that water. Allow the muck to settle. Gather from the side that is upstream. This was the oldest example of prehistoric water purification. Instead of sterilizing the source, one should study it, test it, retain it, and instruct the next person on whatever errors were superfluous. Humans eventually ceased viewing water as something they had to pursue and started making the environment supply it when needed. The archaeological record with wells clearly shows this change. Early Neolithic farming villages in Central Europe provide some of the most striking examples. The dates of wooden wells found in modern-day Germany range from approximately 569 to 1598 BC. These weren't rudimentary trenches that individuals scratched into the earth in the hopes of getting better. In order to access groundwater, their constructor used stone tools to form oak timbers, link them into precisely fitting structures, and drop them into the ground. This is significant since the survival equation is completely altered by a well. Water on the surface is visible. Animals sip from it. It washes with waste. It becomes warmed by sunlight. It can become a concentrated puddle of mud, insects, and regret because to seasonal dryness. In contrast, groundwater frequently passes through rock, sand, and soil layers that eliminate some suspended debris and lessen certain types of contamination. Of course, not all groundwater is safe. Pathogens, minerals, or chemical pollutants may still be present in a crystal-clear well. The reassuring notion that flawless bottled water with a rustic label was generated by old wells is not supported by archaeology. However, a protected well might provide a more reliable and controlled source than an open pool next to a community. It took much more than just thirst to build one. In order to keep the shaft from collapsing, they needed to know where groundwater may be located, arrange labor, remove a lot of earth, precisely shape wood, and maintain the structure after it was built. To put it another way, the first wells were more than just holes. These were neighborhood initiatives. They also show how the water issue was exacerbated by established living. When a source failed or got contaminated, mobile hunter-gatherers might depart. Farmers had houses, cattle, farms, grain storage, and neighbors who seemed to have made the decision to stay close by forever. Moving every time the local stream turned nasty was no longer an appealing business model if people invested in permanent settlements. As a result, dependable water was included into architecture. It dictated the number of people and animals that a region could sustain, where villages could expand, and how long people could stay in one location. Although the archaeological evidence retains the outcome, it does not identify the first person who proposed digging downward rather than trekking farther. People who had turned water from a fortunate finding into planned infrastructure erected timber walls buried in old soil. The puddle was now used for public purposes. The most intriguing question is also the most difficult to prove, which is where the story gets problematic. Did prehistoric people intentionally purify water before consuming it? They had some of the required technology, for sure. Long before pottery was invented, humans were able to regulate fire. Later societies cooked liquids in ceramic vessels or by lowering fire-heated stones into pits, containers, baskets, or hide-lined hollows. Hot stones can boil water, according to experiments. But it's difficult to prove that humans cooked water expressly to eradicate invisible diseases. There is relatively little archaeological evidence left over after boiling. A hearth is evidence that a fire was started. Repeated heating and cooling may be visible in a broken stone. Cooked meal remnants can be preserved in a pot. Since the stream appeared to be medically risky, none of these items have labels that state emergency drinking water prepared. In order to cook, soften food, remove oil, process plants, prepare medications, or make broths, people most likely heated water. Any decrease in illness may have started out as a helpful side effect rather than the desired outcome. Although the observation itself is rarely preserved in archaeology, They were able to see that certain activities resulted in fewer adverse outcomes without the necessity for germ theory. The similar issue arises when water is strained through charcoal, grass, sand, linen, or bark. Mud, insects, and suspended particles can all be eliminated with these products. Water can also be made clearer by letting it settle in a container. However, clarity does not always equate to microbiological safety. While preserving the genuinely ambitious creatures, a homemade filter might enhance texture. Then there is the widely held belief that because ancient humans had more robust immune systems, they were able to thrive in contaminated water. After repeated exposure, they might have acquired a partial immunity to some local diseases. Childhood exposure and gut microbiomes were also different from ours. This, however, was not biological armor. Diarrhea, parasites, dehydration, and even death were still caused by contaminated water, particularly among youngsters. There is no indication of a wellness movement in old cemeteries. And no, drinking beer instead of water does not always cure the issue. In some situations, fermentation and heating during the brewing process could lower some dangers, but making beer initially required grain, labor, containers, and typically water. A nomadic Paleolithic tribe was not traversing the savanna with a chilled keg. The sincere conclusion is more intriguing and less theatrical. Although the evidence is inconsistent, ancient people most likely employed a variety of water-improving techniques in various locations and eras. Certain approaches are technologically feasible. Some are recorded much later in history. Some are survival tips from today extrapolated backward. We seldom get a confession from prehistory. It provides us with hints. Water became more than just a beverage once it was reliable. Communities began to organize around it. A campsite may become a hamlet with a permanent well. A community could survive the dry season with the help of a reservoir. Water might be directed by channels toward kitchens, baths, workplaces, fields, animals, and places of worship. Hydration turned into politics as soon as people started to regulate water on a large scale. It was necessary for someone to dig. The walls needed to be maintained by someone. When the level dropped, someone had to choose who drank first. Unavoidably, someone stood close by and said that the former administration was to blame for the water deficit. Communities throughout the ancient world came up with various remedies. Water was conveyed in pottery vessels, channels were carved into stone, storage pits were lined to prevent leaks, and rainwater collection systems were constructed. Fountains and wells in urban areas developed into social hubs where people discussed news, arranged marriages, quarreled over neighbors, and engaged in the age-old custom of waiting behind someone who had brought an excessive number of containers. Water took on a religious significance as well. Wells, rivers, and springs were frequently regarded as locations with divine connections. Purification, fertility, or healing. This was more than just superstition transcending reality. Another well-maintained community resource could be a protected sacred spring. Ritual regulations could regulate who was allowed to approach it, when it was utilized, and what types of contamination were prohibited in the vicinity. At times, religion served as better storytelling for environmental management. Additionally, medicine became involved. Although some ancient doctors were aware that water quality varied by source, season, taste, smell, and location, they were unaware of bacteria. Water could be heated, strained through cloth, left to settle, or combined with other materials. The fabric strainer that was later connected to Hippocrates' medical tradition was designed to filter out apparent contaminants from boiling water. Although it wasn't a contemporary purifier, it did represent a significant shift. Water was no longer the only option available to people. They were reviewing and making changes. This change was accelerated by large states. Surveying, engineering, taxation, labor, and administration were needed for aqueducts, pipelines, drainage systems, public fountains, baths, and sewers. Waterborne illness was not eradicated by these approaches. For instance, Roman water networks were remarkable, yet they were nevertheless susceptible to pollution, inadequate upkeep, and unequal access. However, the overall accomplishment was remarkable. Human societies had transformed dispersed information regarding groundwater, mud, springs, and rainfall into common infrastructure. It was never easy to find clean water. It was engineered, negotiated, defended, and ritualized. Nowadays, clean water is delivered so silently that most of us only become aware of it when it stops. Centuries of engineering materialize in a glass when you turn a handle. Protected reservoirs, treatment facilities, piping, pumps, chemical testing, filtration, and whole professions dedicated to keeping your breakfast from spreading like wildfire. Because civilization has concealed the effort, it feels instinctive. Such illusions did not exist among ancient humans. They saw the relationship between water and a landscape. A river may flood, shift, or bring garbage from upstream. A spring may deteriorate, or a pool may rot. Attention was essential for survival. Remembering the seasons, identifying plants, tracking animal paths, tasting carefully, excavating patiently, and paying attention when an elderly person said, "Not that one." This does not imply that they were stronger, healthier, or in any way innately friendly with parasites. Numerous people fell ill. Dehydration and illnesses claimed several children's lives. Our forefathers' success was not due to the fact that they were not harmed by unclean water. It was that enough individuals gained knowledge. They transformed experience into cautions, cautions into traditions, traditions into technology, and technology into establishments. A shallow hole was properly aligned. A cistern was created from a storage hole. An aqueduct was created from a channel. Sanitation law, public health, and the contemporary expectation that a drink of water should not contain anything with its own reproductive strategy were all developed from a common rule about safeguarding a spring. This history also explains why one of the most obvious barriers to civilization is still access to clean water. The ability of communities to safely store, transport, test, and distribute water is frequently what separates security from tragedy. So how did prehistoric people manage to live without access to clean water? Their water was frequently not quite pure. They possessed judgment, mobility, cooperation, collected knowledge, and an increasing capacity to lessen the threat posed by hazardous sources. Additionally, keep in mind that your ancestors formerly assessed the quality of drinking water by looking at the health of the frog within each time you reject a glass because it has been outside for 6 hours. Their vigilance was passed down to us. The puddle was just outsourced.